Welcome to CLIL Discussion 2, the ideal CLIL teacher, recorded on the 22nd of January 2009. We didn't actually come to an agreement, Pete and Loretta, but are you happy for us to take that 3-point list and see where we go with it? Your number one, where it says discuss ideal CLIL teacher characteristics, profile aspects, and add, alter, remove them. See how far we get with that. And the other aspect of the discussion, Loretta, Ben, was if we can perhaps talk a little bit about training.
Yeah.
Is that okay?
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, listen. I mean, if you like, I'll make a start, and please do jump in, and we'll take it from there. Because I have to admit, when I wrote down these notes, I was really thinking about the subject teacher rather than the language teacher, and I think the notes that I sent would have to be adapted a bit to really pay respect to an English language perspective CLIL teacher. But really, those 10 points for me are a key components of the CLIL character of a teacher, and what I would go and do now with that table is try and fill it with samples and examples, as I tried to do in the right hand column to deliver a course of training for teachers. And of course the one problem that keeps coming to my mind is, well, we never get ideal teachers. We only ever get teachers who are somewhere along the road, if you like, and so whatever we write down on paper like this is always only going to be some kind of a guiding instrument rather than a realistic material or course that we can put into practice. And that, as I was writing this, I kept thinking about that. I don't know how you feel about that.
Yeah, well, the context that I'm working in uses language teachers and not subject teachers to teach CLIL. That's where I might differ from your situation, Keith.
Yeah. I do apologise to Loretta and Ben for not introducing you, Pete. Would you mind saying a couple of words about that context so that Loretta and Ben have a better idea of who you are and where you're from, just very briefly?
Yeah, no problem at all. I'm stationed out in Switzerland, and I'm in charge of introducing a project which aims at introducing English at primary level, grade 3, which basically means from the age of 8 onwards as a compulsory subject, first foreign language. And I'm heavily involved in doing teacher training, and basically it's the language teachers who are on the one hand trained to teach the language, and on the other hand to include as much content in their teaching as possible. I'm stationed in central Switzerland. I work for the teacher training institution in Lucerne, and my personal background is I'm a trained English as a foreign language teacher. I taught at lower secondary school, commercial school, vocational level, so upper secondary, and at the moment I split my workload halfway, well 50% between administrative work, project management, and on the other hand 50% teacher training.
I'd like to ask one question, Pete, about your context, because I'm a little bit familiar with Switzerland and some initiatives in CLIL in Switzerland, and I wonder if your language teachers actually do have other disciplines as well as their language from their university qualifications.
Well, yes, they are on the one hand qualified primary school teachers who so far were trained to teach all subjects at primary school. The way that teachers now for primary level are trained means that they choose 7 out of 10 or 11 subjects, and they are trained to teach those 7 subjects. One has to be the pupils L1, which is German here. Another one is maths. The third compulsory one is science, and the fourth compulsory subject that the teachers have to teach and be trained in is either French or English, one of the two foreign languages.
Yeah.
And then they've got 3 subjects which they can choose themselves from the whole range of the subjects on the curriculum. So basically we've got all-rounders, but we've also got subject specialist English teachers who are being trained, and what they do is they basically go into the classes, teach 3 sessions of English per week, and out they are again.
I have another question, but I would like to offer the opportunity to Ben and Loretta to jump in before I say anything else. If you do have something you'd like to ask Peach about his context, or our focus for today, because that's where I was starting to head, thinking about the profile of CLIL teacher and Peach's context. But go ahead, please, Loretta, Ben.
Yes. Actually, when I think of a CLIL teacher in my context, I think of a subject teacher. So, because what we are trying to do, and what our government and also the previous government intended to do, was to create the possibility for each pupil, each student, during their curriculum of learning, to have at least one CLIL experience, especially in the 4th year of the upper secondary schools. And this CLIL experience has to be delivered by the subject teachers. The situation is so that in Italy, actually, language teacher normally teach only language, or of course some content connected to language, so literature, history of the country. So when we think of the CLIL teacher, normally we tend to think of the subject teacher teaching using a CLIL approach, supported of course by the CLIL language teacher.
Yeah.
So it's more a team approach than an individual approach.
Yeah.
To CLIL.
That's very interesting, Loretta. It's different here in Germany. I'm working on a secondary level vocational schools, and our teachers all have 2 subjects. So mostly the CLIL teacher would be a language teacher plus additional subject. There are some cases, however, who have enough language proficiency, and they have to prove this in an exam, that they can teach CLIL sequences and CLIL modules without being actual language teachers. So, but this would be more of an exception.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. One of the things we did last time we met, Peach, was talk a little bit about this and try to come to an understanding of what a definition of CLIL would be, and we only really touched very lightly on it. And one of the things we did talk about, though, is the fact that there's the EFL perspective on CLIL and the content perspective on CLIL, and then within those 2 extremes, many variations on this theme. And I'm working in a context where the CLIL teachers really are the subject teachers teaching their subjects to English or other language as a foreign language. And in a way, Pete, your context is, I always think of it as the ideal context, really, where you've got colleagues who have at least pre-service qualifications in subject-specific areas, and that may be the primary curriculum, but it's still a subject-specific area. And to come to our focus, maybe I could ask you about that very that profile. And my question to you is, what needs do you see your trainees, your student teachers have, and what do they see as their main needs when they're going to go into schools and teach the primary curriculum to English as a foreign language? What do they say?
Well, from my perspective, what they need or what they have to be aware of is that they're not only being trained as language teachers, that they have to take into account the content side of what they're teaching as well. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to give them the sort of experiencing CLIL themselves, and making them aware of the fact that ideally they should start off from the content side or from the subject side of teaching, and then add the language component. That accounts for the practicing teachers that we are training now, but it also applies to our trainee teachers who are new to teaching, and but who went through a school system where the teaching of English was basically EFL, and the focus was always on language and hardly ever on content. So making this shift in paradigm is very important in my point of view, and that's what we're trying to do in our training.
Yeah, and would you say that issue of starting from the content applies equally to the language teachers as much as to the content teachers who are going to teach their subject to English as a foreign language?
Well, at the moment in our context, at primary and lower secondary, we don't have any sort of subject teachers then teaching English or content through English. We do have that at upper secondary, either in vocational schools or in grammar schools.
Yeah.
Having said that, of course, every primary teacher who teaches English is also a subject teacher teaching other subjects. But combining the two is something that the trainee teachers and the practicing teachers still find very difficult to do, without sort of always looking at the language side of what they teach. So sort of taking content but teaching content and not using the content as a vehicle to teach aspects of language, of the language system.
I think what's happening in Switzerland, Pete, is actually a very interesting phenomenon, where if I understand correctly, what you're saying is that the language curriculum, there's a movement which is being encouraged to create the language curriculum from content education, and I'm very motivated by that, actually, as a linguist. I think it's a great moment in the development of language education, that the content drives the language. And I think it's actually quite a rare thing, Pete. I don't know what Ben and Loretta think, but that building the language curriculum from what we know about what happens in the content curriculum, is that familiar to both of you in Italy and Germany?
Yes, I think this is also the Italian approach. I mean, start from the content and then develop a language curriculum starting from the content. Yeah. So, and actually this is the kind of training that teachers most frequently required, the subject teacher, I mean they want to know how to develop language learning through their normal subject teaching.
Yeah.
And so this is the approach we are trying to make teacher familiar with. And of course, as we don't have mother tongue teacher, for example, this is always a teamwork. I mean, subject teachers are always supported by the language teacher. Not together in the classroom, this is too expensive for the present situation, but together, planning lesson together, attending together in training service, for example, and so on. So, but starting, I mean, the starting point is the content.
As far as I see, modern language teaching, EFL, is communicative language teaching. So we have message before accuracy, we have things like task-based learning and so on, and CLIL goes all the way. It starts on at the other side, it starts with contents, but there is some connection, of course. There is also a tension, there is a sort of a different approach between CLIL and EFL, of course, but there are also parallels. And we are well aware of that, but I think I would be interested in Peach's situation in Switzerland. Switzerland is a multilingual country, having Italian, French and German. Do you feel that this has any effect on the teaching atmosphere for CLIL?
I don't really know, because the concept of teaching content through a foreign language or through English is a rather new concept. It's come up for the last, I'd say, for the last 3 or 4 years, 3, 4, 5 years. It's been established at upper secondary level, where we probably have the same situation as you, Lauretta, and Bernd in Italy or Germany, where you try to integrate subject teachers who've never taught a language to teach their subject content through English or through a foreign language. Whereas here we are using sort of, in our project, we're using teachers who are qualified to teach other subjects and are now qualifying to teach English as well, with a strong sort of experience in their own English learning career, that the focus is on language, the focus is on form, and one of the dangers that we're trying to avoid is that they are using the content simply as a kind of a vehicle, but the main focus is always language, whereas CLIL, the way I see it, should be the other way around. Content comes first, the content is important, and you do not define your syllabus according to the language system, where language is graded, but you take the content, put it at the centre of what you're doing, and then around it you look what kind of language do pupils need in order to cope with the input, and what language do they need in order to create output.
I mean, I if I can jump back in again, but do the same. You know, feel free to jump in and out. My own understanding of let's call it Swiss CLIL, if that's possible, is that it's very revolutionary, really, to language teaching. I think that this idea that let's say a group of colleagues like Peach and others in training context and teaching context sit down together and they agree a content syllabus that is appropriate and relevant to a certain age group, and then around that they identify language need based on that content and the skills that are normally relevant within those content areas. And that's where the language comes from. And I think it's a very interesting discussion we're having, because I don't think many CLIL contexts look at it that way. I think what tends to happen in the EFL CLIL world is colleagues have a textbook and a language curriculum and they try and squeeze content into it. And I really think that what's happening in Switzerland is turning that all around, and it's literally turning it on its head.
I think I should try and answer Bernd's question, because I haven't really touched on that yet. The sort of influence of French and Italian and Romance, or the fact that Switzerland is a plurilingual country. It doesn't really influence CLIL. What it does is, at the moment there is a drive within teacher training institutions, but also project managers for primary L2 teaching, is that the notion of plurilingualism is being pushed, and teachers are, or we are trying to make teachers aware that there's not just L1, in our case German, but that there are various different languages around, and they sort of influence each other more than we think it does. But a direct influence on the teaching of CLIL is something which I can't see.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah. Listen, can I bring us back to our ideas on the ideal teacher? Because I think what we started to talk about is a specific kind of teacher, really, and that is, in the Swiss context, colleagues who are teaching language, and they're receiving training on how to teach language through content, and that's one kind of CLIL teacher, isn't it? And I'm interested in talking a little bit about if we can provide a program of training based on a description of the CLIL teacher that meets everybody's needs. Personally, I don't think we can, but I think it's useful for us to start talking about what those characteristics of teachers' needs are, and see where we get with that. I mean, I feel personally that making resources is a very good way of getting teachers to think about language. Making content materials and talking about where the language needs may be. So I would say an ideal CLIL teacher has an awareness of how important language is within their content subject in terms of the role of language within materials design. That's one of the points I put on my in my document that I sent out to everybody, is an awareness of where language is and its role within content materials.
Yes, I think this is one of the major points, because sometimes subject teachers, in my experience, tend to give a lot of language for granted. I mean, they do not reflect on what kind of language they are using, what kind of structures they are using, what kind of functions they are using when they are teaching. And if they have to teach also language and a content together, they have to be aware of all these kind of things.
I would agree. I would say that this means that they have to have skills at structuring the content, skills at visualizing the content to make it easier for the students to understand the contents really. Yeah. So what you said is material design, to me means structuring also visualization, helping the students to use the of these two difficulties, contents and language.
Yeah, absolutely.
Of course, I think there's also a minimum of language competency the teacher needs. There are many teachers in my schools, and they would say they would never be able to teach CLIL because they don't have even a basic competency of English. So the question would also be, apart from a skill at contents design, what is the minimum you would require in your context for language proficiency?
Well, what do you think? I mean, I have some ideas of my own, but I wonder, what do you think, Pete Loretta? Could you put a price on it? You know, this minimum level of competence for teachers in English.
Well, you know, as subject teacher, there was a lot of discussion among subject teachers about this point, because for some researchers and also for some teachers, a B1 B2 could be enough to teach a module, a CLIL module or a CLIL activity, and because the focus is more on methodology than on a real, language competence. And I think this actually is not completely wrong, because if there is a real support and integration between subject teacher and language teacher, then it is possible, actually.
Yeah.
Of course, if you consider a subject teacher being also language teacher, a B2 is not enough.
Yeah.
It depends on what kind of profile you are thinking of. If you are thinking of a subject teacher teaching not a whole curriculum but part of a curriculum, or just some activity as CLIL activity, then maybe a B2 could be enough. But of course, if you are thinking of a whole CLIL curriculum for a subject, then maybe a B2 is not enough.
It's a very interesting question, isn't it? Pete, go ahead, please.
Yeah, I can only tell you what we've done here in central Switzerland, which had a great influence on the rest of Switzerland. When we started our project, that was even before we considered integrating CLIL into our primary English project, was we decided to go for C1. And one of the reasons why we chose C1 and not B2 was we looked across the border into Liechtenstein, into Austria, and into the southern German Bundesländer. And when they started introducing English at primary level about 10-15 years ago, they predominantly went for B2. And what happened was that they all discovered that B2 is probably too low for the teaching of English at primary, especially if you want to teach content. And Austria and Liechtenstein are now upgrading their teachers to C1. So when we started our project a couple of years ago, we opted for C1. And there's a drive within Switzerland now to sort of cooperate across the different cantons, and we now are in sort of almost unanimous agreement that all the teacher training institutions across Switzerland, even in the French-speaking parts, aim for that C1. And what is now happening is that in the canton of Zurich, the teacher training institution there, they decided for lower secondary, so for grades 7, 8 and 9, teachers who teach English and French there will have to have C2.
Uh-huh.
Well, I can only throw one other country into the pot, and that's Holland, where I know they take as their kind of benchmark, and actually forms part of an inspection procedure leading to recognition and status of bilingual school as Cambridge proficiency level. And I would talk about Bulgaria as well, where we don't have a benchmark of language for subject teachers. But in the past we've talked about using Cambridge First Certificate as part of training for teachers. And those two extremes probably show you what could be the mixture in different countries of language levels all over Europe.
Well, I think that C1, if you are training a subject teacher, is a very demanding training language level, at least for the Italian context, of course.
Here in Germany, it's basically C1 that is demanded. And what I found is, when I was reading about Switzerland, Zurich, the vocational area there, vocational schools, that they say for special cases B2 is enough at vocational schools for modules and so on. Okay. So C1 is what we are demanding here. But I agree with Loretta that this means, of course, that you can only acquire that level of proficiency if you go abroad for a long time, if you submerge in the language, and well, the question is, do you have enough applicants to find enough people who want to do the training with this proficiency?
I mean, that's the key question, really, isn't it? Sorry, Pete, go ahead.
I think that is certainly true. I must say, I'm not that much in favour of asking for C2 for lower secondary school teachers, although the Canton of Zurich has now started. Well, the teacher training institution in Zurich, they sort of unilaterally decided on that C2. I personally, I would prefer differentiated kind of approach with having a C1 level, a general C1 level, sort of asking teachers to sit an internationally recognised C1 exam and give proof of that through that exam, but on top of that adding one or two modules of classroom related, usually oral language competency at level C2. That's something which I'd favour much more, because I don't know about the situation in Italy or in Germany, but when you state C2 here in Switzerland, 99% of all teachers will opt for proficiency, and in my point of view, proficiency is not the right exam to, in a classroom context, to make sure that teachers are up to scratch in terms of their language proficiency to teach CLIL.
So maybe what we need is a new exam altogether, Pete.
Yeah.
Maybe, yeah.
I mean, I know Cambridge I think they've actually brought out their TKT CLIL, and I wouldn't suggest that is the kind of exam that institutions would want to set up courses to work towards for CLIL teachers. It's more of a well, it's a knowledge test, isn't it? That's what it says on the packet, that teachers may sit to have in their portfolio rather than to provide themselves with a course of training to gain language and skills to go and teach their subjects to a foreign language. But it's a step in the right direction, surely, that an institution like Cambridge is at least thinking about this profile of teacher.
Yeah, I think sorry, if I may butt in, I think that's true concerning the TKT CLIL module. It's more like kind of a knowledge module about what CLIL is and how it works, rather than a sort of a language component, language module.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. I think we should also consider the possibility of developing partial competences, language competences through CLIL. I mean, not an articulated, a real language competence, but just, for example, reading, develop reading through a CLIL module. This could be just a starting point for a country where CLIL is not so developed as it is, for example, in our country.
Yeah.
And then starting with this kind of competences, maybe also motivate teacher to learn better a foreign language, but at the same time they can act as CLIL teacher because they feel more comfortable just developing one or two skills.
I perfectly agree with you, Loretta. This goes well with the concept of intercomprehension, you differentiate between production and reception. You say, I can train and improve student skills in one of the areas, for example, in reading comprehension or things like that. And he can talk in a different language, but as long as he understands, and this is called intercomprehension as far as I know. It's one of the concepts of the EU. And as far as I know, CLIL is a very pragmatic approach, and there are many things you can, connect with it. There are many aims you can reach through CLIL. So maybe this is one of the ways you can go.
I mean, it would be very practical to try and offer teachers a modular approach to gaining CLIL qualifications, wouldn't it? It would be manageable for them as well in the real world that they live and work in. Not many teachers can take a year or two out to go and live and work in a foreign country, develop their language, and you know what I mean? It would make very practical sense to have a modular approach to CLIL training.
Yes, especially if you are thinking of language different from English. I mean, if you want to maintain also a plurilingualism, you cannot think of for pupils and teacher having competences in more than one language at the same level.
Yeah.
So if you are thinking of at least two language for each future European citizens, then it is also necessary to have different level of competences. And CLIL could be a good way to develop also this kind of partial competence.
I think that's a very important point you are making, Loretta, because as I was saying earlier, talking to Peach about the situation in Switzerland, it also depends on the cultural atmosphere in which you live. I have a lot of relations with people who live in Israel, Palestine, and what I find there is they are competent in many languages. They talk German, they talk Hebrew, they talk English, because they have to communicate. And when I hear people from Scandinavia, they watch their films in English, and their English is quite good. And the thing is that when you really live in a context where you need the language, then there is much more people are ready to sort of use it and apply it, and it's just natural to use different languages, to be plurilingual.
I would getting back to what Lauretta said about trying to focus on partial language competencies for CLIL teachers. If you take CLIL as an umbrella term, which in one extreme could mean simply teaching bilingual sessions or sessions in two languages, and the sort of at the other side total immersion, not all teachers or CLIL teachers will need the same kind of competencies. And secondly, I think aiming for partial language competence does not mean that you've got to remain there. It could also mean that you start off improving one area of your language competence and then gradually try and become more proficient in other areas as well, so that it's like a kind of a modular approach to your own language competence, especially for non-native speakers.
I mean, are you all there? It's just gone very silent all of a sudden.
No, I hear you very well.
Pete, do you hear me?
Yeah, I can, yeah.
Okay. It just changed the sound all of a sudden, and I wondered what it was. Okay, I was thinking that one of the things that's happening in Europe, which really falls very much in line with what we're saying, is the idea of portfolios of evidence of qualifications and experience, and it sounds like that's what we're describing for CLIL teachers here. We're saying that what really teachers need is the opportunity to gather qualifications and experiences, and then evidence of their achievements within those opportunities in some sort of a portfolio. Do you think that's what we're saying?
Yes, I think this is very important, because it's also, also a motivation to go on, as Peach said before. And it was actually what I wanted to say, that if I ask a teacher to have from the very beginning of his or her CLIL experience a C1 or a C2 level of language competence, then maybe the number of teachers available for CLIL teaching would be very low. But if I accept the idea that a teacher can be also a CLIL teacher with a lower level of competence, of course not lower than B2, but having a very good CLIL mastery a very good mastery of CLIL methodology, of CLIL approach, then maybe CLIL can really become a reality in the teaching context of not all but many European schools.
Yeah.
And then we can, of course, as in many aspects of our teaching experience, you can build your profile, your teacher portfolio on these kind of skills. And I think this can be the way, a possible way for developing CLIL.
Yeah.
Well, we are in the fortunate position that because English has just been introduced as a new subject into primary schools, we can pick and choose. We've got more teachers who want to be trained than we can actually train because of financial constraints. So there's competition, and that of course helps to set a very high language competence level right from the beginning. I know of schools where there was stiff competition. There were twice as many teachers who want to teach English or wanted to teach English, and the principal simply turned around and said, okay, we'll choose those teachers with the highest language competence, and that was somewhere in between the C1 and C2. In that respect, we are fortunate.
And don't you think that younger teachers will have a better language competence because they spend more time abroad using Erasmus or other opportunity offered by the European Union? Because I get the impression that let me say, between 5 and 10 years, the new teaching staff of the school will be made up by teachers who have spent more time abroad than our generation, for example, spent. And maybe this would be an opportunity to develop then CLIL approach more than language competence. Not only in English, of course, because many students make experience in non-English speaking countries. So.
No, you're quite right in that respect. The younger the teachers are, and I'm talking about practicing teachers now, the younger they are, the more willing they are to sort of take a sabbatical of 3 months, half a year, a whole year, and go to an English-speaking country, prepare for their C1 certificate there, and as a byproduct, of course, become much more fluent. That also applies to the trainees now here. A lot of them finish grammar school and then take a gap year and go abroad, go to a language school, prepare for C1, and come back already with a C1 language level. That is happening more and more here. And what we also try to provide at our teacher training institution is that our students can, we've got different partner universities across Europe, amongst others, 1 or 2 in the UK, and they're allowed to go and study for a term, for a semester there, and without having to sort of resit that semester here in Switzerland. And that, of course, combined with attending language courses in the UK, helps them to improve their language competences. And we can see a marked improvement, and sometimes the results are really astonishing.
Sure.
This is something that is.
Go ahead, Ben.
Yes, this is something that must be welcomed, because I think you can. The only way to acquire the fluency you need is, going abroad for a while. Do you have compulsory stays abroad in your teacher trainings in Italy and in Switzerland?
Not compulsory in Italy. I mean, more and more young people, young students spend actually 1 year or a semester abroad, but it's not compulsory, except in some private university, but like some economics or this kind of university, but not for future teacher to be, or not for the moment actually.
Yeah. In central Switzerland, we've got to distinguish between the practicing teachers we're training to teach English and the trainees at the Pädagogische Hochschulen. The practicing teachers have to spend, it's compulsory, they've got to spend a 4-week period at a language school in an English-speaking country. And the trainees, the trainee teachers, they have to do a minimum of 10 weeks. But there's no sort of compulsory attendance of a language course there. They can do some work experience. They can even go and sort of work on a farm, stuff like that. But both teachers have to do a compulsory language stay in an English-speaking country.
Another shade I can add from southeastern Europe to that is a consequence, if you like, of easier mobility. Now I see a lot of my colleagues pack their bags and go and live and teach in another country like the UK or Germany, and they teach their subjects through the languages they were using to teach their subjects here in Bulgaria. And these are primarily young teachers who see an opportunity. It's a good opportunity for them, and obviously most people here hope these young people are going to come back eventually, and that's just one thing I imagine happening in a lot of Eastern European countries where there are teachers with these qualifications and these skills. They're possibly being headhunted to fill gaps in staffing in other countries.
One of the problems that our teachers are faced with is, of course, the fact that Switzerland is not a member state of the European Union. Switzerland is affiliated, they've got the so-called bilateral agreements, but that doesn't mean that they can participate in any of the EU projects. I don't think that Switzerland can, or Swiss teachers can profit from Erasmus programs, for example. That's one sort of drawback.
Yeah. I'm not sure, Pete. I'm not sure. I hear whispers from teachers I meet that there are some opportunities to EU funds for Swiss teachers, but I'm not sure. I'll check that and add it as a footnote to our discussion, actually.
Yeah, I'd have to check that as well, but I know that some of my colleagues, okay, that was a couple of years ago, they tried to get EU funding for some language stay projects, and they were told flat out, no chance, you're Swiss.
Yeah.